You understand why we have to do this, right? I stared at Eleanor Thorne from HR, her face a perfect mask of corporate concern. Behind her, my direct supervisor, Julian Porter, leaned against the wall, arms crossed, not quite meeting my eyes. We were sitting in the executive conference room on the 16th floor of Vantage Finance, overlooking the gray, rainy skyline of Boston. Eleanor was holding a manila folder, her fingers tapping against the cardboard. "We have received several complaints about your behavior, Harvey," she continued, sliding the folder across the mahogany table. "Given the serious nature of these allegations, we are putting you on paid administrative leave effective immediately while we conduct a thorough investigation." My throat tightened and a cold weight settled in my chest. I opened the folder. Inside were anonymous statements claiming I was hostile, intimidating, and creating a toxic environment. There were stories of incidents I had no memory of, conversations that had never occurred, and accusations without dates or specifics. One claimed I had arrogantly refused to assist a junior analyst, while another alleged I had threatened to delete company backups. It was entirely fabricated. I looked at Eleanor, searching for any sign of hesitation, but she remained perfectly poised, a seasoned bureaucrat executing a rehearsed script. "This is absurd," I whispered, flipping through page after page of lies. "Who is saying these things? I deserve to know my accusers. I have been here for 15 years. Julian finally spoke up, his voice flat. "Harvey, this is standard protocol. The complainants requested anonymity out of fear of retaliation." "Fear? From me?" I looked at him, disbelief washing over me. "The man who stays late every single Tuesday to help the junior database engineers? The database administrator who saved this firm's trading platform from collapsing 3 separate times? I have dedicated 15 years of my life to this firm, working nights and weekends to keep the network running, and you are treating me like a criminal based on a handful of anonymous sheets of paper." I started here when the office was just a small floor, with 12 developers. I built the entire schema, database clusters, and recovery plans. Now you tell me I am a threat." Eleanor continued, her voice dripping with rehearsed sympathy. "During this period, you are not to contact anyone from the office or access any company systems. Your credentials have already been suspended. We will need your key card before you leave." The room seemed to tilt slightly. 15 years. I was 54 years old, and I had built Vantage Finance's database infrastructure from the ground up. I knew every table, every query, every index, and every backup routine. I knew the physical servers in our data center better than I knew my own apartment. I had guided the firm through 3 major system migrations, saved millions of dollars by optimizing database storage, and was the only person who understood the legacy database structures that kept our financial services online. I had spent countless holidays monitored by alarms, ensuring our clients never experienced a single minute of downtime. And now, in the span of 5 minutes, I was being exiled based on nameless, baseless complaints. Julian stepped forward with a small cardboard box. "We have already collected your personal items from your desk, Harvey. It is better if you leave quietly. We do not want to cause a scene in front of the team." I looked at the pathetic box. 15 years of my professional life reduced to a ceramic coffee mug, a small succulent plant, and a framed photo of my cat. They had planned this. They had gone through my desk while I was attending the morning status meeting, completely unaware that my career was about to implode. The timing was too perfect, the logistics too smooth. They wanted me out of the building before I had any opportunity to speak with my team or access my workstation. I felt a deep sense of violation, realizing they had handled my family photographs and private notes while I was sitting innocently in a conference room. "We need you to sign this acknowledgement," Eleanor said, pushing another document forward, "and security will escort you out of the building." I signed it. My hand was steady, but my mind was in a protective fog. Security was already waiting at the glass doors of the conference room. As I stood, clutching the cardboard box to my chest, Julian finally looked me in the eye. "Just cooperate with the process, Harvey. It is easier that way." That was the moment the fog cleared, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a calculated strike. They marched me through the open plan office, past the silent, stunned faces of colleagues I had worked alongside for over a decade. No one spoke, No one dared to look at me. Security escorted me into the elevator, down to the lobby, and watched me walk out into the cold Boston rain. As I sat in my car, staring at the office tower through the rain-streaked windshield, the shock began to fade, replaced by a slow-burning anger. I was Harvey Vance, 54 years old, the quiet senior database administrator who fixed the problems that others could not solve. They thought they had neutralized me. They thought that by locking me out of the systems, I was powerless. They were wrong. They forgot that when you build the house, you know exactly where the hidden entryways are located. For 15 years, I had kept the keys to the digital kingdom, and they had no idea that a database administrator always keeps a backup plan. I sat in my car for a long time, watching the lights on the 16th floor, planning my next move in the quiet darkness. The first night in my apartment was a sleepless blur of anxiety, pacing, and calculations. The shock of the sudden exile had worn off, leaving behind a cold, sharp determination. I kept replaying the conference room meeting in my head, focusing on what Julian had said. "Your credentials have already been suspended." In their corporate arrogance, Julian and Eleanor assumed that disabling my Active Directory account was enough to block my access. They did not understand how modern database systems actually work, or how much redundancy is required for emergency recovery. 3 years ago, during the massive system migration, I had configured an emergency recovery backdoor. It was a root-level account, completely independent of our standard Active Directory system, designed to allow access if the primary authentication servers crashed during a storm or a power failure. I had documented it in our secure database vault, but when the migration was finished, the documentation was archived and the backdoor remained. It was my secret entrance, a quiet line of code that bypassed all external security logs. At exactly 12 minutes past midnight, when the network traffic was at its lowest and the security team was unlikely to notice any minor anomalies, I opened my personal laptop, connected to my secure virtual private network, and initiated the connection. My hands hovered over the keyboard. I entered the root credentials. For 5 seconds, the screen remained black. Then, the command prompt blinked, and I was in. I had full administrative access to the entire Vantage Finance network. My first destination was the Human Resources secure folder. I found my employee file easily. It was labeled Vance Investigation. As I opened the directory, I saw something that made my stomach turn. The folder had been created 4 weeks before my suspension. For a month, Eleanor and Julian had been secretly compiling these complaints while smiling to my face, asking me to help them with their weekly reports and thanking me for my hard work. They had sat in meetings with me, drinking coffee, while planning my professional execution. The complaints were 7 in total. When I read the raw text files, I noticed something strange. The writing style was identical across all 7 documents. They used the same sentence structures, the same legalistic phrasing, and the same unusual terms. More importantly, the file metadata showed that all 7 documents had been created and saved within the same 48-hour period, even though they claimed to represent incidents spanning several months. It was a complete fabrication, written by a single person. I extracted the document properties and found the author tag belonged to Eleanor Thorne. I immediately shifted my focus to the email server. As the root administrator, I could query the Exchange database directly. I searched for messages containing my name over the past 2 months. The search results populated my screen. I opened an email from Julian to Eleanor, dated 3 weeks prior to my suspension. "We need to accelerate the Harvey Vance situation," Julian had written. "The fourth quarter audit is approaching, and we must have this resolved before the external auditors arrive. The behavioral complaint should give us sufficient groundwork to remove him. Push for a minimum 4-month investigation period to ensure he has no access during the audit. If he is in the building when the audit starts, he will notice the discrepancies." Why did they need me gone for the fourth quarter audit? What was Julian trying to hide? I began querying the financial database, specifically looking for transaction patterns that had occurred over the last 2 years. I had to be careful. I was not a forensic accountant, but I knew where the financial ledgers were stored in the SQL Server tables. It took me 3 hours of scanning database tables and executing select queries before I found the anomaly. I looked at transaction records, filtering for manual approvals and payment overrides that bypassed the automated matching system. A vendor named Apex Solutions had been receiving monthly payments ranging from $24,000 to $32,000. The services were described as database optimization and network load balancing. This was absurd. My team managed all database optimization, and we had never worked with an external vendor named Apex Solutions. I had personally managed the budget for database maintenance, and I had never seen this company on our approved vendor lists. The system logs showed no technical service tickets associated with this vendor name. I pulled the transaction history. Over the past 2 years, Julian Porter had approved 42 separate payments to Apex Solutions, totaling $1,700,000. Every single invoice was approved by Julian, and they were all coded to bypass the standard vendor verification system. I opened a separate browser windows and searched the public Massachusetts business registration records. The records showed that Apex Solutions had been registered 2 years ago. The resident agent and sole owner of the company was a man named Jonathan Porter. My breath caught in my throat. Jonathan Porter was Julian Porter's brother. Julian was embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from Vantage Finance, routing the money directly to his brother's shell company. And he had manufactured the HR complaints to get me out of the office before the external auditors could ask me about those suspicious database transactions. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but I needed more evidence to prove the conspiracy. I sat in my room, downloading the database logs, securing the digital trail that would expose Julian's private family pipeline. The realization of Julian's fraud was overwhelming, but I knew I could not stop there. If Julian was stealing millions, how was Eleanor Thorne from HR involved? Why was she cooperating so willingly in my suspension? She was a calculating professional. She would not risk her career just to help Julian, unless she received a significant share of the profits. On the 4th night of my investigation, I accessed Eleanor's personal drive on the company network. It was protected by a simple password that I easily bypassed using my root privileges. Inside, I found a folder named Recruitment Fees. I downloaded the spreadsheets contained within. What I discovered was a separate, highly sophisticated skimming operation. As the HR director, Eleanor was responsible for negotiating contracts with external recruitment agencies. When Vantage Finance hired a new employee, the firm paid a placement fee, typically 15% of the new hire's salary. Eleanor's spreadsheets showed that she had been reporting inflated placement fees of 25% to the accounting department, while paying the recruitment agencies the actual 15%. She was pocketing the 10% difference. Over the last 3 years, Eleanor had skimmed $480,000 through this method. The records were meticulous, tracking every new hire and the exact amount she had transferred to her private account. She had even listed the offshore account numbers where the funds were currently deposited. She was using a regional placement agency named Boston Elite Staffing, inflating their invoices on our systems and routing the excess into an account in the Cayman Islands. But there was a third player in this conspiracy. To slide these inflated recruitment invoices and the Apex Solutions payments past the accounting controls, Julian and Eleanor needed someone inside the finance department to look the other way. I returned to the email server and searched the communications of our financial controller, Oliver Sinclair. It did not take long to find the connection. Oliver Sinclair had discovered the irregular payments to Apex Solutions during a routine internal review 6 months ago. Instead of reporting Julian, Oliver had sent him a private email. I noticed the Apex Solutions invoices. Oliver had written, "The documentation is incomplete and the services seem redundant. We need to adjust this before the next audit, or we will have questions from the external auditors. I assume you can help me secure my performance bonus for this year?" Julian had replied within an hour. "Consider it done, Oliver. I will approve a $90,000 performance bonus for you this quarter. Let's make sure the ledgers are clean and the database tables do not raise any red flags." They had formed a corrupt alliance. Julian was embezzling vendor fees, Eleanor was skimming recruitment fees, and Oliver was falsifying the records to protect them both. And I was the only person who stood in their way because I was the database administrator who managed the financial transaction logs. If the external auditors asked me to pull the raw transaction tables, the fraud would be exposed instantly. Then, on the sixth night, I found the email that made my blood run cold. It was a message from Julian to Oliver, dated just 2 days before my suspension. "We cannot just keep Harvey on leave," Julian wrote. "Once the audit begins, the investigators might still demand to speak with him, or he might find a way to contact the board. We need to permanently ruin his credibility. We need to plant the evidence of the Apex Solutions transfers on his home computer. I have hired someone named Justin Cobb to handle the physical aspect. He will get into Vance's apartment this weekend while he is out of town. We will make it look like Harvey was the one routing the money to offshore accounts. Once the police find the files on his laptop, he will be finished." I sat in the dark of my apartment, my heart hammering against my ribs. They were not just trying to fire me. They were planning to break into my home, plant fabricated evidence on my laptop, and send me to federal prison for a crime they had committed. The sheer malice of their plan was terrifying, but it also gave me a strange burning focus. They had underestimated me. I was not going to run. I was going to fight back, and I was going to dismantle their lives the way they had tried to dismantle mine. I spent the rest of the night downloading every single email, spreadsheet, and database transaction logged to my encrypted external drive, ensuring I had multiple copies of their crimes. I locked the files in a secure container, checking the hash values twice to ensure absolute data integrity. The next morning, I made a critical decision. I could not handle this alone. I needed legal representation from someone who understood corporate fraud and whistleblower protection. I reached out to Clara Brooks, a former college classmate who had spent the last 2 decades working as a corporate defense attorney, specializing in financial crimes and whistleblower cases. We met at a quiet diner in Salem, far from the Boston office. I brought my laptop and an encrypted drive containing the emails, financial transactions, and HR records I had gathered. I spent 2 hours walking her through the evidence, watching her expression shift from professional interest to deep concern as the details of the conspiracy unfolded. "Harvey," Clara said, leaning forward, "this is incredibly serious. The financial documentation you have is clear evidence of embezzlement and conspiracy. But you need to understand the risk. Your access to these systems after your suspension could be classified as unauthorized computer access under federal law. We must proceed with extreme caution to protect you." Clara outlined a strict legal strategy. "First, you must stop accessing the company network immediately. You have more than enough evidence. Second, we must file a formal whistleblower complaint under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, specifically Section 806, which protects employees who report financial fraud in publicly traded companies. Third, we need to handle the threatened break-in." She looked at me, her eyes sharp. "You said they plan to break into your apartment this weekend?" "Yes," I replied. "Julian Porter hired a man named Justin Cobb. They think I will be in Connecticut visiting my mother." "We will use that to our advantage," Clara said. "We will file a report with the local police department about a potential trespass, but we will not mention the corporate fraud yet. More importantly, we will capture the entire break-in on video. Do not stay in the apartment, Harvey. Install security cameras, wipe your laptop, and let them walk into the trap. We need physical proof of their conspiracy to destroy your credibility. We will show the police that they sent an intruder to manipulate your private hardware." I followed her instructions to the letter. I purchased 2 high-definition security cameras that connected to my phone via a cellular network. I installed one in my living room, hidden inside a bookshelf, facing my desk, and the other near the front door. Next, I backed up all my personal data from my laptop to an external drive. I then wiped the laptop's hard drive completely, reinstalling a clean operating system. There were no files, no saved passwords, and no corporate databases left on the machine. If they tried to access my files, they would find a completely empty system. On Saturday afternoon, instead of driving to Connecticut, I parked my car down the street from my apartment building. I sat in the driver's seat with my binoculars, watching the entrance. At exactly 3:45 p.m., a white utility van pulled up to the curb. A man wearing a cable technician uniform got out, carrying a tool bag. It was Justin Cobb. My phone buzzed. The motion sensor on my camera had been triggered. I opened the app and watched the live video feed. Justin Cobb entered my apartment using a physical key that Julian had likely obtained from my HR file. He walked straight to my desk, sat down, and opened my laptop. I watched as he plugged in a USB drive and began typing. Through the camera's microphone, I heard him mutter a curse. He took out his phone and made a call. "Julian, there is nothing on this computer. It is completely clean. It looks like it was recently reset." He paused, listening to Julian's instructions. "Yeah, okay. I will install the remote access software and copy the offshore transaction files onto the drive anyway. It will look like he tried to wipe the evidence but missed these folders." I recorded every second of the video, capturing Justin Cobb's face, his actions, and his conversation. I felt a wave of anger seeing this stranger touch my personal computer, but I forced myself to remain calm. After 20 minutes, he closed the laptop, removed his USB drive, and left the apartment. I waited until the van drove away, then returned to my apartment. I retrieved the video files and sent them to Clara. We had them trapped. We had the evidence of the embezzlement, the conspiracy, and now, the physical break-in. We were ready to strike. We spent the next 2 weeks preparing the whistleblower documents, ensuring that every claim was backed by primary source documents and verified transactions. Clara compiled a binder of evidence that was absolutely airtight, prepared to withstand any legal challenge. 7 weeks after my suspension began, the call finally came. Eleanor Thorne phoned my personal number. Her voice was cold and formal. "Harvey, our investigation is complete. We need you to come to the main office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock to discuss the findings and resolve your status." "I will be there, Eleanor," I said, keeping my voice neutral. I met Clara Brooks in the lobby of the Vantage Finance building at 15 minutes before 9. She was carrying a leather briefcase containing our entire whistleblower report, the financial spreadsheets, the email transcripts, and the video files. "Let them present their case first," Clara whispered as we entered the elevator. "Let them make their accusations. We will let them commit fully to their lie before we reveal what we have." We entered the executive conference room on the 16th floor. Julian Porter, Eleanor Thorne, Oliver Sinclair, and the company's senior legal counsel, Gordon Finch, were already seated at the table. A single chair had been set up for me on the opposite side. Eleanor spoke first, her face showing no emotion. "Harvey, we have completed our investigation. The findings are grave. We have documented multiple instances of professional misconduct. But more importantly, we have uncovered massive financial fraud. Our internal systems show that your admin credentials were used to approve over $900,000 in unauthorized payments to various vendors." Gordon Finch, the attorney, leaned forward. "This is a criminal matter, Harvey. The company is prepared to offer you a choice. You can sign this termination agreement, waive your rights to any legal action, and sign a strict non-disclosure agreement. If you cooperate and help us recover the funds, we may decline to involve law enforcement. If you refuse, we will call the police today." He was staring at his notebook, refusing to meet my eyes. Oliver Sinclair sat next to him, tapping a pen against the table, trying to look confident. "Before I sign anything," I said, my voice calm and steady, "I would like to present our own findings. This is my attorney, Clara Brooks." Clara opened her briefcase and placed several bound documents on the table, sliding them to Gordon Finch. "Mr. Finch, I suggest you read these documents carefully before your clients say another word. We have already filed formal whistleblower complaints under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, Section 806, with the Department of Labor, the State Financial Crimes Task Force, and the Securities and Exchange Commission." Eleanor laughed, a nervous sound. "What is this nonsense? We have the system logs showing Harvey's credentials." I opened my laptop, which was connected to the room's display screen. "Let us talk about those credentials, Eleanor. And let us talk about these emails." I projected the emails between Julian and Oliver, discussing how they would split the $1,700,000 embezzled through Apex Solutions. I projected the spreadsheets showing Eleanor's recruitment fee skimming that totaled $480,000. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Oliver Sinclair's pen slipped from his hand and clattered onto the table. The blood had completely drained from Julian's face. Eleanor tried to speak, but her mouth opened and closed without making a sound. And finally I said, "Let us look at what happened in my apartment last Saturday at 3:45 p.m. I played the video. On the screen, Justin Cobb was clearly visible, entering my home, opening my laptop, and discussing the plan with Julian on the phone. The audio was crystal clear. Gordon Finch stared at the screen, his jaw dropped. He slowly turned his head to look at Julian, then at Eleanor. Is this true?" Julian did not answer. He put his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "Here is what is going to happen," Clara Brooks said, her voice cutting through the panic in the room. "In exactly 15 minutes, investigators from the State Financial Crimes Task Force will arrive at this building. They already have the warrants. We are giving Vantage Finance one opportunity to minimize the public fallout. Mr. Porter, Ms. Thorne, and Mr. Sinclair will call an emergency board meeting immediately, confess to their fraud, and submit their written resignations." Gordon Finch stood up, his face pale. "I need to contact the chief executive officer and the board members immediately. This meeting is adjourned. We must cooperate fully with the authorities to protect the firm." Within 10 minutes, the emergency board meeting was called. Within an hour, Julian, Eleanor, and Oliver had signed their resignations and were escorted from the building by security directly into the custody of the waiting investigators. They were led through the lobby in handcuffs, a public ending to their years of quiet corruption. The legal fallout was swift. Julian Porter and his brother, Jonathan Porter, were prosecuted for federal bank fraud and embezzlement. Julian received a sentence of 6 years in prison, while Jonathan received 4 years. Eleanor Thorne pled guilty to wire fraud and was sentenced to 3 years. Oliver Sinclair cooperated with the prosecution and received a lighter sentence of 18 months. Vantage Finance survived the scandal, but the board of directors was completely restructured. They offered me my position back, along with a promotion to Director of Database Security and a significant salary increase. I declined the offer. I had spent 15 years in that building, and it was time for a change. I wanted to build something of my own, free from the toxic politics of corporate offices. Instead, I negotiated a substantial settlement for wrongful termination and a hostile work environment, which allowed me to take 6 months off to decompress. I bought a small cabin in Maine, where I spent the summer hiking and relaxing. Today, I run my own independent database security consulting firm in Boston. My very first client was Vantage Finance, who hired me to audit their entire database structure and close every back door. I keep the cardboard box with my old coffee mug and the picture of my cat on a shelf in my new office, a quiet reminder of the journey. When people try to use their power to crush you, the best response is to stay calm, gather your facts, and let the truth do the fighting. Never let intimidation stop you from exposing corruption, and always remember that a thorough investigation of the facts is the most powerful weapon you can possess. The truth may take time to emerge, but when it does, it is an unstoppable force.